England, 1847. The chandeliers of Whitmore Hall glittered like stars above a restless sea of gossip. Eleanor Whitmore, her chestnut hair gathered in elegant coils, and her dark eyes touched with quiet defiance, moved gracefully through the throng of London society. She wore a gown of sapphire silk, chosen not to dazzle but to fortify, as though its strength of colour might lend her courage. 3 months earlier, she had been the envy of the city, betrothed to Charles Redford, the Duke of Everstead, handsome, charming, and regarded as the most eligible bachelor in England. Yet tonight, as she stepped into society for the first time since her humiliation, whispers curled through the crowd like smoke. There she is, the one who was abandoned for Lady Margaret Harcourt's fortune. Eleanor held her head high, though each glance, each half-stifled murmur, cut her like glass. Charles had not only broken their engagement, but had done so with ruthless haste, announcing his betrothal to Lady Margaret before Eleanor had even told her parents of his betrayal. What had once been her future, the role of Duchess, the promise of affection, the dream of partnership, had collapsed in a single evening. She remembered his words with a clarity that still hollowed her chest. "Love is a luxury, Eleanor. My duty to my family name must come first." It was not duty he had chosen, but wealth. Lady Margaret's father had holdings in America that promised riches beyond imagination. For Charles, love had proved expendable. "Miss Whitmore," came a gentle voice, pulling Eleanor from her thoughts. It was Mrs. Langley, her father's dearest friend, with kind eyes and a hand that squeezed hers warmly. "You have braved this evening with such courage. London should feel ashamed for its cruelty." "Thank you," Eleanor replied with a faint smile, though her throat ached. "One must face society eventually." "One must, yes," Mrs. Langley agreed, her tone sharp enough to slice through gossip. "Though society should tremble at facing you." Despite the kindness, Eleanor's gaze drifted across the ballroom. There, Charles himself, gleaming in his formal attire, golden hair aglow in the light, Lady Margaret clinging to his arm, her diamonds flashing with every turn. Eleanor's heart clenched at the sight. The memory of betrayal was a wound not yet scarred over, still raw beneath every breath. "Forgive me." The words startled her. A tall figure stood before her, bowing slightly. Eleanor looked up and found herself caught in the bluest eyes she had ever seen. "The fault is mine," she said softly, steadying herself after nearly colliding with him. "Nathaniel Hawthorne, Duke of Ravensmere," he introduced, his voice deep yet courteous. "Eleanor Whitmore," she answered, curtsying with practiced grace. Something flickered in his gaze, recognition, perhaps, or curiosity. "Your reputation precedes you," he said, though his words did not carry the cruelty she braced for. "I hear of your charitable work at the orphanage on Harley Street." The mention startled her. Most men spoke only of her broken engagement. Few noticed her quiet labours. "You are well informed, Your Grace." "I make it a point to know those who give to society rather than merely adorn it," Nathaniel replied, his eyes briefly cutting toward Charles and Lady Margaret before returning to hers. "Would you honour me with a dance, Miss Whitmore?" Eleanor hesitated. The Duke of Ravensmere was known for his reserve, rarely dancing at gatherings, preferring his vast estate in the countryside to London's glittering stage. All eyes would follow them. But something in his manner, direct, respectful, unflinching, steadied her. "I would be delighted," she said at last, offering her gloved hand. As the orchestra began a waltz, Nathaniel guided her onto the floor. His presence was commanding yet unintrusive, his steps assured. "You dance beautifully," he remarked. "As do you," Eleanor replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "I had thought you disdained such frivolities." A small smile touched his lips. "Astute. London society often wearies me, but occasionally one encounters a soul worth stepping into the light for." Heat rose in her cheeks at the frankness of his gaze. "You are very direct, Your Grace." "Nathaniel," he corrected gently. "My friends call me Nathaniel." "I was not aware we were friends." "Not yet," he said, his smile deepening, "but I have a feeling we soon shall be." Eleanor caught sight of Charles then, his handsome face darkened by a frown, Lady Margaret clutching him more tightly, as if to stake her claim. The orchestra swelled, carrying Eleanor through the motions, yet for the first time in months her heart felt lighter. When the dance ended, Nathaniel bowed low over her hand. "I travel to Ravensmere tomorrow," he said. "Our estates border one another. Perhaps we shall meet again in the countryside." "Perhaps," Eleanor replied, surprised at how much she hoped it might be so. As the evening waned, Charles found her in the entrance hall, desperation shadowing his polished features. "Eleanor," he whispered, reaching for her arm, "you look well." "Thank you, Your Grace," she answered coldly, emphasizing the title that had once been hers to claim. "Must we be so formal? We have known each other since childhood." "Formality," she said, her voice steady though her chest raced, "seems fitting after betrayal." He leaned closer, his voice urgent. "My engagement to Lady Margaret was a matter of practicality. It does not change what was between us." "On the contrary," she replied, pulling free, "it changed everything." When she turned, his hand caught her sleeve. "Eleanor, please, you do not understand." But she did. She understood perfectly. She lifted her chin, her eyes cold with finality. "Good evening, Your Grace." In the carriage home, her father, Lord Whitmore, finally broke the silence. "You carried yourself admirably, my dear." Eleanor gazed out at the fog-strewn streets, her resolve crystallizing. "Father, I shall accept your suggestion. I will go to Whitmore Park in the countryside tomorrow." He nodded approvingly. "Excellent. The country air will do you good." Eleanor said nothing more, but in her heart she knew the truth. It was not the air she longed for, but the thought of the Duke of Ravensmere and the possibility that just perhaps her future was not yet lost. The rolling hills of Derbyshire stretched before Eleanor like a balm for her wounded spirit. Whitmore Park, her family's country estate, was not as vast as the neighbouring Ravensmere lands, but its modest elegance and familiar gardens had always been a sanctuary in her youth. After only a week there, Eleanor already felt the oppressive weight of London gossip lifting from her shoulders. The chatter of ballrooms faded, replaced by birdsong and the rustle of wind through oak leaves. For the first time in months, her lungs filled with air untainted by humiliation. The countryside promised renewal. On a bright spring morning, Eleanor rose early, donning a simple walking dress of pale muslin and sturdy boots. Her maid, Clara, fastened her hair into a practical knot. "Shall I send for the carriage, Miss Eleanor?" she asked. "No, thank you," Eleanor replied. "I will walk to the village. It will do me good." Clara hesitated but said nothing further. Eleanor had made it her routine to visit the small schoolhouse, where she had begun volunteering as a teacher for the local children. Their eager faces, their small fingers tracing letters, their laughter over simple sums. These things filled her with a sense of purpose that London had never offered. In their unguarded gratitude, she found healing. But as she neared the village, a haze of smoke curled into the sky. Eleanor quickened her steps, her heart pounding. By the time she reached the square, she found a crowd gathered before the schoolhouse, which belched smoke and flames from its windows. The children stood huddled at a distance, some weeping, while their parents formed a desperate bucket line. "What happened?" Eleanor cried, rushing to the schoolmistress, Mrs. Fairfax. "Lightning in the night," the woman answered, her face streaked with soot and tears. "It smouldered until morning. We saw it only when the children arrived." Without hesitation, Eleanor seized a bucket and joined the line. Soot smeared her gown, smoke stung her eyes. For nearly an hour she laboured shoulder to shoulder with villagers, until at last the flames died, leaving the schoolhouse a blackened shell. Her arms ached, her dress ruined, but she scarcely noticed. She looked instead at the faces of the children, wide-eyed with fear. "Where will they study now?" she murmured, aloud. "That," came a familiar voice behind her, "is the very question, is it not?" Eleanor turned sharply. Nathaniel Hawthorne had dismounted his horse, his tall figure commanding attention, even in simple riding clothes. His presence seemed to still the crowd, his authority quiet but absolute. Unlike the polished duke she had seen in London, here he appeared a man of the land, sleeves rolled, boots muddied, every inch a steward of those who depended upon him. "Your Grace," Eleanor stammered, suddenly aware of her soot-streaked face and bedraggled gown. "I did not expect—" "I heard of the fire at Ravensmere," he interrupted gently. "I came to offer aid." His blue eyes moved over her with something like admiration. "Though it seems you have already done more than most." Mrs. Fairfax curtsied deeply. "Your Grace, we are desperate. The children cannot go without lessons, but there is no roof to shelter them now." Nathaniel studied the ruin for a moment. "The east wing of Ravensmere Hall stands unused. It will serve as a temporary schoolroom. Beginning tomorrow, I will send carriages to bring the children." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the villagers. Mrs. Fairfax's hands flew to her mouth. "Your Grace, that is far too generous." "Not at all," he said firmly. "Education is essential. We will make it work." His gaze found Eleanor again. "Perhaps Miss Whitmore might continue her excellent service as well." Eleanor's cheeks warmed. "If Mrs. Fairfax approves, I should be glad to assist." "Then it is settled," Nathaniel declared. "The children shall not lose their schooling." As the villagers poured out thanks, Eleanor stole a glance at him. Unlike so many noblemen whose generosity was made for display, Nathaniel's offer bore no trace of vanity. His sincerity was unfeigned, his concern genuine. "You are staring, Miss Whitmore," he said softly, amusement glinting in his eyes. Eleanor flushed. "Forgive me. I was only thinking, your actions today reveal more than rumour ever has." "And what conclusions have you drawn?" "That perhaps there is more substance to the Duke of Ravensmere than London society supposes," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. A smile deepened across his features, softening his otherwise stern countenance. "High praise indeed. May I escort you home? You've had quite an eventful morning." "I am hardly presentable," she protested, glancing at her soot-blackened sleeves. "On the contrary," Nathaniel said, his voice warm, "I find sincerity and courage far more appealing than silk and jewels." They walked together along the country lane, his horse led easily by the reins. Eleanor spoke of the children, of her ideas for improving rural education, thoughts she had scarcely shared aloud before. He listened intently, occasionally asking a question that revealed his keen mind and sympathy for her. Convictions. For over an hour they walked, and Eleanor realized with some surprise that not once had Charles Redford crossed her thoughts. For the first time since the heartbreak, she felt light, even hopeful. At the gates of Whitmore Park, she paused, reluctant to part. "Will you join us for tea?" she asked impulsively. Nathaniel's smile held regret. Alas, I cannot today. Duties at Ravensmere call, but tomorrow when the children come, then I shall see you. Eleanor inclined her head. Then I shall look forward to it. That night, as she sat by her window overlooking the moonlit gardens, Eleanor found her mind returning to the soot-stained morning, to Nathaniel's unwavering gaze, to the warmth in his voice when he had spoken her name. What had begun as ruin and smoke ended instead with the faint stirring of possibility, of a new story yet unwritten. The east wing of Ravensmere Hall had not echoed with such lively sound in decades. Once reserved for distant relations and long-forgotten guests, its high ceilings now rang with children's voices, their laughter tumbling like bright music through corridors heavy with history. Long tables served as desks. Chalkboards had been brought in from the village. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating faces bent earnestly over slates and primers. Eleanor moved among them with quiet purpose, guiding small hands through shaky letters and reciting sums with patience. "Excellent, Thomas," she praised one boy, whose timid smile widened at her words. "And you, Clara, your penmanship grows finer each day." She cherished these moments, the way knowledge sparked light in young eyes, the way gratitude replaced fear. At the far end of the room, Nathaniel stood with arms folded, observing. He wore no ducal finery, only a simple waistcoat and rolled sleeves, his hair slightly dishevelled from tending to preparations. Yet in this setting he seemed more regal than he ever had at a London ball. "You command this room better than I ever could," he remarked as she approached. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Children respond to kindness, not authority." "And yet," he countered, "they respond to you as though you were both." The warmth in his tone startled her. She looked away, pretending to correct a student's spelling, though her heart beat faster. Nathaniel's presence unsettled her in ways both disquieting and strangely comforting. He did not flatter idly, nor seek to charm for sport. His words seemed to carry weight, sincerity woven into every syllable. At midday, when the children departed for luncheon, Nathaniel escorted Eleanor through the gallery that overlooked the gardens. Paintings of stern ancestors gazed down as they walked. "My family has resided at Ravensmere for nearly 2 centuries, he explained. They valued strength, but too often mistook cruelty for it. I would like to change that legacy." Eleanor studied his profile, the sharp line of his jaw softened by thought. "You already have. Today you gave a roof to children who had none." He glanced at her, his blue eyes steady. "You remind me that even a duke can forget what matters most." Their steps slowed. Silence stretched between them. Eleanor felt an unfamiliar ease in his company, a space where she need not defend herself from whispers or weigh each word for propriety. He saw her not as Charles's discarded bride, but as herself. Yet peace proved fleeting. A week later, as Eleanor walked from Ravensmere to Whitmore Park, she heard the rattle of carriage wheels behind her. Turning, her breath caught. The Redford crest glimmered upon the lacquered door, and from within emerged the figures she least wished to see, Charles and Lady Margaret. "Eleanor," Charles said, striding forward, his expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "I did not expect to find you here." "Nor I you," Eleanor answered coolly, her hands tightening around the basket she carried. Lady Margaret's voice dripped with condescension. "We have come to tour our new holdings in Derbyshire. Surely you have heard of our plans. Charles intends to modernize Everstead with the funds my father has provided." Her tone was pointed, her gaze sharp with triumph. Eleanor merely inclined her head. "I wish you joy of it." But Charles pressed on, his voice urgent. "Eleanor, might we speak privately?" "There's nothing to say," she replied, attempting to pass. "On the contrary," he said, lowering his voice, "much remains unsaid between us." Lady Margaret bristled. "Charles, really—" But before more could be exchanged, hoofbeats approached. Nathaniel reined his horse beside them, his presence commanding, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Charles's hand, lingering too near Eleanor's sleeve. "Miss Whitmore," he said evenly, "I trust you are unharmed." Eleanor lifted her chin. "Quite unharmed, Your Grace." Charles's jaw tightened. "Ravensmere, I did not realize you and Miss Whitmore were acquainted." Nathaniel's reply was calm but edged with steel. "Miss Whitmore is a guest at my hall and a valued companion in charitable endeavors. I would advise you to treat her with the respect she deserves." The air grew taut, Margaret's lips thinning as her eyes darted between the men. Charles's face flushed with anger, yet under Nathaniel's unwavering gaze, he faltered. "Of course," he muttered at last. "Come, Margaret." The Redford carriage departed in a clatter of wheels, leaving silence in its wake. Eleanor exhaled shakily, her composure barely intact. "Thank you," she murmured. "No thanks required," Nathaniel replied. "I will not see you troubled by a man who abandoned honor for coin." The vehemence in his tone startled her, yet stirred a warmth deep within. For the first time since her betrayal, Eleanor felt truly defended, not by pity, but by loyalty freely given. That evening, she sat in her chamber at Whitmore Park, penning letters for the orphanage fund. But her hand trembled as she wrote, her mind replaying the encounter. Charles's desperation, Margaret's disdain, and Nathaniel's unyielding defense, they tangled within her like threads of a tapestry, yet unfinished. When Clara entered with a tray, Eleanor spoke softly, half to herself. "Strange how swiftly the heart may begin to heal in the presence of one who sees us clearly." Clara tilted her head. "Do you speak of the Duke, miss?" Eleanor hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Perhaps." But in truth she knew it was more than perhaps. It was the beginning of something neither contract nor scandal could dictate. A new bond forming, fragile yet profound. The gardens of Lady Ashworth's manor stretched in a riot of summer blooms, roses spilling over trellises, white lilies edging the marble fountain, peacocks strutting across manicured lawns. Her annual fête was the highlight of the Derbyshire season, drawing families from every surrounding estate. Eleanor had hesitated to attend, wary of whispers that still clung to her name, but her father insisted. "You must not hide forever," Lord Whitmore said firmly. "Society must see that you are unbroken." And so Eleanor entered the fête on her father's arm, clad in a gown of pale lavender that caught the light like morning mist. Heads turned at once, some with admiration, others with thinly veiled curiosity. She braced herself against the weight of scrutiny, her smile calm though her pulse raced. It was not long before Nathaniel appeared, moving easily through the crowd, bowing to Lady Ashworth before making his way to Eleanor. "Miss Whitmore," he greeted warmly, his eyes lingering in a way that steadied her. "You grace the gardens more than the roses themselves." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "Your grace flatters with dangerous ease." "Truth is never dangerous," he countered, "save to those who fear it." Their exchange drew murmurs from nearby onlookers. To be courted, openly, by the Duke of Ravensmere was no small thing. Eleanor sensed the shift in the air, the way gossip rippled, recalculating. Yet just as her spirits lifted, a familiar shadow fell across her. Charles Redford. He approached with Lady Margaret on his arm, her gown dazzling with imported silk and jewels meant to announce her triumph. Charles's eyes, however, were fixed upon Eleanor. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice low but insistent, "might I claim a moment of your time?" Eleanor stiffened. "I think not, Your Grace." Margaret's smile sharpened. "Oh, do be gracious, Eleanor. Old friends must surely part on kinder terms." But before Eleanor could reply, Nathaniel stepped forward, his height and composure making his presence impossible to ignore. "Miss Whitmore is in no need of your counsel, Lady Margaret," he said evenly, "nor of your husband's belated attentions." The nearby crowd hushed. Charles's jaw tightened. "You presume much, Ravensmere. My past with Miss Whitmore is none of your concern." Nathaniel's eyes blazed, though his voice remained calm. "It becomes my concern when a lady is hounded by the very man who discarded her. If you respected her at all, you would not seek to trouble her further." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Lady Ashworth herself looked on with wide eyes, clearly torn between propriety and fascination. Eleanor's breath caught. Never had anyone spoken so boldly on her behalf. Charles flushed, his pride pricked. "You overstep. Eleanor knows my heart." "She knows," Nathaniel cut in, "that you bartered affection for fortune, and she deserves far better." The words fell like thunder. Murmurs swelled, every ear straining. Charles's hand clenched at his side, his face rigid with fury. Margaret tugged at his sleeve, whispering sharply, but he did not retreat. "Eleanor," Charles said, his voice rising, "you cannot deny what we shared. Say the word, and I—" But he got no further. Nathaniel moved closer to Eleanor, his expression fierce yet tender, and in one swift motion he took her hand. "Miss Whitmore owes you nothing," he declared. Then, before the stunned assembly, he raised her gloved hand to his lips and kissed it with a reverence that silenced even the boldest whispers. For Eleanor the world tilted. Heat rushed through her, her knees threatening to give way. This was no polite courtesy. It was a vow, a claim, a promise laid bare before all of society. Nathaniel's eyes held hers, unflinching, until she forgot entirely that others watched. The crowd erupted, some in shock, some in delight. Lady Ashworth clapped her hands, declaring the scene most romantic. Others whispered feverishly of what it meant. The Duke of Ravensmere openly declaring his devotion to Eleanor Whitmore. Charles, humiliated, pulled Margaret away, his face ashen. But Eleanor scarcely noticed. Her world had narrowed to the man before her, his lips brushing her hand, his steady gaze making her feel, for the first time since heartbreak, not diminished, but cherished. As Nathaniel led her away from the fountain, shielding her from the press of curious eyes, Eleanor whispered, "You should not have done that." "On the contrary," he said, his voice low and sure, "I have long wished to, and now all the world knows what I intend." Her heart raced. "And what do you intend?" His eyes softened. "To win not merely your gratitude, Eleanor, but your heart." She could not speak. Her throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes, not of sorrow, but of a fragile, impossible hope. That evening, as she lay awake in her chamber at Whitmore Park, the memory replayed endlessly. Nathaniel's steady hand, the fire in his voice, the press of his lips upon her glove. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, as though to hold the echo of it there. For the first time since Charles's betrayal, she dared to dream that love, true, steadfast love, might yet be hers. The morning after Lady Ashworth's fate dawned with sunlight pouring over Whitmore Park, gilding the lawns and gardens. Eleanor lingered by her window, replaying the events of the previous day. She could still feel the warmth of Nathaniel's lips upon her hand, still hear the firmness in his voice as he had declared, before half of Derbyshire, that she deserved better than Charles Redford. Such a moment should have mortified her, but instead it had kindled something long dormant. Hope. When Clara entered with her breakfast tray, she could not conceal her grin. "All the county is speaking of it, miss. They say the Duke of Ravensmere has chosen his lady at last." Eleanor flushed. "They say too much. He acted only to silence Charles." Clara's eyes sparkled. "Perhaps, but I have never seen a man look at a woman as he looked at you." Eleanor turned away, unwilling to let her maid's words stir her heart further. Yet all morning she found herself restless, awaiting any sign of Nathaniel. It came sooner than she expected. By afternoon, a footman arrived with a sealed note. "Might I call upon you this evening?" "Ravensmere." Her breath caught. After only a moment's hesitation, she replied, "You may." When Nathaniel arrived at Whitmore Park, twilight draped the gardens in violet and gold. He greeted Lord Whitmore with practised courtesy, then requested a walk with Eleanor. Her father, clearly approving, gave his consent. They strolled down the gravel path, the air rich with the scent of roses. For a time, silence stretched between them, companionable but heavy with unspoken thoughts. At last, Eleanor said softly, "You placed me at the centre of a storm yesterday. The whispers will not soon fade." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Let them whisper. I will not see you diminished by their cruelty, or by a man who discarded you as though love were a bauble to be exchanged." His words struck deep, and yet she could not help but ask, "Why, Nathaniel? Why take such a risk for me?" He paused, his gaze lifting toward the horizon where the last rays of sun burned. "Because I know what it is to be betrayed." Eleanor turned to him, startled. "My late wife," he continued, his voice low, "Caroline Somerset. We married young. I thought myself blessed beyond measure. But she did not love me. Her heart belonged to another, a man I called friend. When their affair was exposed, scandal consumed us both. She fled abroad and died there, in childbed." Eleanor's heart clenched. I had heard whispers, but never the truth. "The truth," Nathaniel said bitterly, "was that I was a fool, and when she died, I vowed never again to give my heart where it could be crushed. I withdrew from society, content to fulfill my duties as Duke without entangling myself in affection." He glanced at her then, his eyes raw with vulnerability. "Until I met you." Her breath caught. "Nathaniel, you are not like them," he said fiercely. "You do not court power or fortune. You see worth where others see none. You bring light even where there is smoke and ruin, do you not see? In you I find what I thought forever lost." The confession shook her to her core. She had longed for honesty, for a love that did not measure wealth or station, yet part of her recoiled in fear. "And if I cannot give what you ask?" she whispered. "My heart has been shattered once already. I do not know if it can be trusted again." Nathaniel took her hand, his touch firm yet gentle. "Then let it heal at its own pace. I do not ask for instant surrender, only for the chance to prove that I will not fail you as others have." Tears stung her eyes, but she held them back. "You speak as though you mean it." "I have never spoken truer words," he said simply. They stood there in the gathering dusk, the air alive with the scent of roses and the hum of crickets. Slowly, as though drawn by a force neither could resist, Nathaniel lifted her hand once more and pressed his lips to her bare skin, just above the wrist where her pulse fluttered. Eleanor trembled, not with fear, but with awakening. At last, she whispered, "I cannot promise tomorrow." "Then promise only tonight," he murmured. Their eyes locked, and in that moment Eleanor felt the fragile shell around her heart begin to crack. Not fully, not yet, but enough to let light through. When they returned to the house, Lord Whitmore watched them closely, reading in Eleanor's face what she herself could scarcely name. Later, alone in her chamber, she pressed her hands to her cheeks, her heart racing. Could it be? After all the pain, the shame, the betrayal, could love truly find her again? Sleep eluded her, chased away by the memory of Nathaniel's voice, his gaze, his vow. She did not yet know whether to trust it, but for the first time since her world had collapsed, she wanted to try. London glittered once more, chandeliers blazing above silken gowns and polished shoes. The ballroom at Devonshire House thrummed with music, laughter, and the low hum of whispers. It had been weeks since Eleanor last set foot in the city, weeks since Lady Ashworth's fate had altered the course of her life. Now she entered the ballroom on her father's arm, her gown of ivory satin and pearls shimmering like moonlight. Her composure never faltered, though her pulse quickened under the gaze of countless eyes. Everywhere she turned, conversations hushed, whispers trailed after her like shadows. There she is, the Duke of Ravensmere's choice. The one Charles Redford spurned, the one he now regrets. Eleanor held her head high, refusing to shrink beneath the weight of society's scrutiny. Then she saw him. Nathaniel. He stood near the orchestra, resplendent in black and silver, his broad shoulders commanding attention, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on her. When their eyes met, the noise of the ballroom fell away. He crossed the floor in long, confident strides, bowing low before offering his hand. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice pitched to carry, "will you honour me with this dance?" Her heart leapt. "Gladly, Your Grace." The musician struck a waltz, and in the swirl of music and candlelight, Eleanor found herself gathered into Nathaniel's strong, sure hold. They moved as though made for one another, the world narrowing to the rhythm of their steps, the warmth of his hand at her back, the steady fire in his eyes. For the first time, she did not feel like a spectacle. She felt cherished. But the illusion shattered when Charles Redford stepped forward. His expression was taut, his pride visibly frayed. As the waltz ended and applause rose, he intercepted them near the refreshment table. "Miss Whitmore," Charles said loudly enough for surrounding guests to hear, "you forget yourself. This show with Ravensmere, surely it is meant only to provoke me. Do you truly believe society will ever accept you after what transpired between us?" Gasps rose around them. Lady Margaret, standing nearby, wore a thin smile, as though savouring Eleanor's impending humiliation. Eleanor's cheeks burned, yet she refused to cower. "It is not I who should fear society's judgment, Charles. It is you who traded affection for coin." A ripple of astonishment swept the room. Charles's face darkened, his fists clenching. "You dare—" But Nathaniel stepped forward, his presence radiating command. His voice rang through the hall. "Enough! You cast aside a jewel, Charles, and now begrudge another for recognizing its worth. You will not speak so to Miss Whitmore again." Silence fell. Dozens of eyes watched as Nathaniel turned to Eleanor, his expression softening. "For too long you have been forced to bear slander you did not deserve. No more." And then, before all of London society, he went down on one knee. Gasps became a roar of whispers, ladies fanning themselves, gentlemen craning their necks. "Eleanor Whitmore," he said, his voice unwavering, "I have known betrayal, and I have known loss, but in you I have found honesty, courage, and grace. I love you, and I would spend the rest of my life proving worthy of your heart. Will you marry me?" The world stilled. Eleanor's breath caught, tears springing to her eyes. Only weeks ago she had thought herself ruined beyond repair, unworthy of happiness. Yet here he was, this man who saw her not as broken, but as whole. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, Nathaniel, I will marry you." The ballroom erupted. Some applauded, others gossiped feverishly, but none could deny the spectacle. Charles's face drained of colour, Lady Margaret's smile curdled. But Eleanor no longer cared. Nathaniel rose, taking her into his arms, and kissed her hand once more, sealing their promise before the world. That night, as their carriage rattled away from Devonshire House, Eleanor leaned against him, her heart still racing. "You have altered everything," she murmured. Nathaniel kissed her brow. "No, Eleanor, you have. You gave me back hope. You gave me back love." She closed her eyes, tears slipping free, not of sorrow, but of joy. At last, her heart was no longer bound by the chains of betrayal. At last, she was free, free to love, free to be loved, wholly and without fear. And as London's lights faded behind them, Eleanor knew that this time she had not been chosen for wealth, nor abandoned for fortune. She had been chosen for herself.